So this is going to be our 9 to 9:45 panel, Money Talk 101, Finances in the Cannabis Industry. Um, we'll spend that last 15 minutes kind of doing either Q&As or if we have some extra time kind of rolling over. But I would love to introduce our board member and treasurer of IWC and owner of Vineyard Accounting, Heather LaFoon, and the chief executive officer at High Haven Cannabis, Mahja. Thank you both for joining us today. Wanted to kind of kick it off as we're talking through. I think our last session talked a lot about safe banking, so I think I do want to kind of kick off with that. But before we do that, can you both kind of give a brief intro of kind of where you've been in the cannabis industry and your journey? We'll
Sure.
start with Heather.
Sure. So we've been in the cannabis space specifically about 3 years. I've been in the tax and accounting space for 12 to 15 years. But really, once I learned about the intricacies of cannabis accounting, it became a very intriguing puzzle to me, and how different it is from regular other business endeavors. It really became an opportunity to educate and fill a need. So that's how we got into this space, is really just seeing the need and seeing, is there a way that we can help fill that void and educate and help entrepreneurs and business owners in this challenging space.
Yeah, so my name is Mahja Sulemanjee, and I'm founder and CEO of High Haven Cannabis, and we've got 5 retail licenses that we won in the social equity round, and we've got 3 of those stores up and operational today. And how I got into this space was I did healthcare for about 15 years previous to getting into the cannabis space, and in 2015, when cannabis was finally in Illinois, I joined the ranks of a small cannabis company at the time that became a very large multi-state operator. And we saw a lot of growth in the first 5 years of me being there. And we just, expanded from having 4 licenses to, 90 licenses, 47 ready to build and operate, and 26 of them operating. And so it was just a really, really interesting experience. In 2019, I resigned my position there and I started High Haven. And at that time, it was just a glimmer. We were just all seeing what would happen and wishing for the best. And that led us to a really fruitful road in these last few years, especially in the cannabis space for social equity applicants. I think it's a really unique time. I've been able to get High Haven, the dispensaries up and operational within, months of us releasing the licenses. And so how capital intensive and what really needs to happen, and getting the company to be profitable today in less than 2 years of us operating and having those licenses. We have all 3 stores up now, all cash positive, all profitable, and working our way right through that. So it's been a really great experience, and a long journey. And we've needed a lot of help from a lot of smart people, a lot of accounting, a lot of great bookkeeping, and I know Heather knows very well all about that. But every penny counts, and every penny is accounted for, and decisions are made very, very strategically based on all that.
Yes, so that is very true. Probably more so than many other industries. Maybe not any other industry, but every penny being counted. When you look at accounting across the cannabis space, it is similar similar to other industries, in that you have profit and loss, balance sheets, things like that. But you also have a lot of other hurdles along the road that sometimes people don't always fully understand. A lot of them are around banking, capital investments, things of that nature. In our earlier session, we talked about safe banking. Safe banking impacts, or the lack of safe banking, really impacts every component of this industry. We're accountants, but because we serve cannabis clientele, we're on our third bank. People don't think about it from an ancillary perspective of it isn't just license holders that are impacted in this space. It's really anybody that is participating in this space. So it's finding state regulated banks instead of federal banks, credit unions. Credit unions are often opportunities where give opportunities in this space that federally chartered banks don't always want to enter into the space. It's being open and having those candid conversations with your banker. We had a client that had a conversation with a banker, got a bank opened, and a week later, somebody else in the banking company flagged their account and they lost their account. So it's really making sure that you're having conversations and talking through all of the different components of your business so that your banking partners understand the needs that you have in the banking space. Do you need merchant services? Is it just a bank account? Dispensaries, they move a large volume of cash. Having that conversation with your bank about what is your cash transportation process? Where can you bank? Where can you bank all your cash? Can I bring my cash to the branch? Some branches won't accept that volume of cash. And it is again a cash intensive industry, and it's counterintuitive to think that if you roll into the bank with a bag of cash, they're going to say, no, I'm sorry, we can't take that. But strangely, and it does happen. Mahja's nodding her head. So in the banking space, there are a number of things to be aware of and have conversations about. Merchant services is another prime example. Visa and MasterCard don't like cannabis transactions, so finding merchant services, the ability to take payment processing other than cash payments. How are you going to do that? Can you do that through your bank? Do you need to find a third-party provider? There are numerous providers that are out in the market. Again, I always encourage, have that open conversation, and flat out ask, do you process cannabis payments? This is not an industry where ask for forgiveness later. That usually doesn't turn out well. This is an industry where you absolutely, on all fronts, in my opinion, need to be upfront and open and have those conversations with your service providers, and opening in your network. So, talking to other folks in a similar position, other license holders, people that have had good experiences and not so good experiences. This is definitely an industry of community and networking, and people are very willing to share their experiences and both good and bad, and their connections and their networking options. Mahja, do you want to jump in on banking?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're absolutely right. Finding a bank in the cannabis space was so difficult. We went through three banks before we found somebody that we really felt strongly could handle the services that we needed. We're running a lot of money every day, every week. These are large sums of transactions that are taking place. And sometimes they're to cannabis vendors and sometimes they're not to cannabis vendors. And so it hits all different categories, and having a bank that can support real business activity is very important, and not having that could be detrimental to your business. So finding a good banking partner, I think, is exceptionally, and somebody who's exceptional at what they're doing in this space is going to become really important. For a long time, we had our hands tied around this type of, the financial banking specifically, and we still do in many ways, but it's come a long way. I think what's also really interesting is, there is certainly the banking aspect of what we're looking for in the relationship that we need and the services that we need, which Heather spoke about quite um, in some detail there. But on the backside, also from a retail perspective or from wholesale, wherever you are in the supply chain, you really have to have a idea of what are your SOPs around handling money, right? You mentioned cash transport, you mentioned a couple of these other things. There is so much movement of money happening in our space, whether it's, logistically handing over cash or not, or whether it's swiping cards or working with merchants, right, to be able to swipe those cards, or an ATM vendor. And so, in our retail stores, we offer all three of those experiences. You can go to an ATM if you'd like, you can pay cash if you'd like, obviously, and then, you can run a PIN debit type of a machine if you'd like. And there's more and more providers that continue to get joining the market with these PIN debits. And really, what does that look like for you? Can you reconcile your reports at the end of the night? That's going to be really important. Is there a portal for them to be able to go in to be able to get this information? Can my managers get it? Can my accounting team get it? Those are all really important aspects of who we partner with. Again, same as the bank, right? You got to have good partners in this space to really come full circle. And just Heather was saying, it's a small industry. Everybody kind of knows each other well enough, and you build a reputation, and everyone kind of knows who's doing what well, and we share those resources, and it's a small pool. And I think those things become really important. At some point, as you have a better relationship with your banking partners or your merchants and things like that, you're really able to fine tune then what you need this to look like for your business, and where you could possibly be losing any profitability there. So some really interesting relationships that come out of this, and I think we'll see the evolution of banks, right, as rescheduling happens and things like that. It'll be really interesting to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Talking about that, about your banking relationships, that kind of leads us into investments. We talked in our earlier session about how very tight capital is right now. Capital is tight in general. Cannabis capital is even tighter. It is tough to get money. Illinois licensees have a lot of constraints on their license. There are guidelines around how people can invest in a conditional license. Can the license be sold? At what point can it be sold? All of those things really play into your ability to take on investment. And one of the things that we talk about in the investment space is really the need for solid financials and a solid pitch deck. Even pre-operational, you need to have a very good financial model. We encourage people, if you are in a position that you need a lawyer, you are also in a position that you need an accountant. You might not be bringing money in yet, but you are putting a lot of money out. You're spending a lot of money. You want to make sure to track all of that money. And then in the investment space, your accountant is really one of the partners on your team to help you build the picture in your slide deck so that it is appealing to investors. A cannabis investor is going to be looking for something different than a standard investor. In the investment space, you also not only need to think about what do I need to open my doors, you also need to think, how long do I need cash flow and liquidity after I get my doors open? How long is it going to take me to become profitable where the business itself can generate enough cash flow to keep us running? So not only getting to day one, how far do we need to look in that investment space? Again, this is another space where in this industry and in this environment, people are very relationship driven, very willing to share networks, willing to open their networks, but it comes down to what is your pitch, what is your model, what are you asking for? What are you offering? What are you able to offer in return for that investment? Mahja, if you want to jump in on anything there on investment and pitch deck, those kinds
Yeah,
of things.
absolutely. So, what I think about in this particular arena is there's two ways to kind of get yourself into this space. And, I mean, if you didn't win a license first round, right? You won a license, that's one thing. Or even if you did win a license the first round or second round, third, whatever it was, right? If you've won a license or you're looking to acquire a license or you're looking to invest, there's a couple of ways I like to think about this. Either you are looking as an investor through like risk and reward, right? You're saying, what's the level of risk? And like Heather was mentioning, the pitch deck shows you the team, shows you the financial, shows you their assets, shows you an ability to how are they managing these assets? Have they had that level of experience to do this? As we mentioned, this is a lot of cash. This is big numbers, really understanding that they have some ability, they've done this in the past to some extent, right? Or they have a team of people who can help you with this, whether it's accounting people at the table, whether it's an attorney at the table, just really a well-rounded group. Um, those things become relatively important. So if you're looking at investing, you're looking through what the risks are and if this team is good enough and if this assets make enough sense and if the location and all these different things, and when you get the timeline and when these things are actually plausible to happen and how likely is it that they're going to have a hiccup. That's one way to make a decision on if you want to invest in a particular project. And I think that's a great way. And some people have some money and they're like, I don't know exactly this space. This is a good space for somebody who maybe is not an operator, has a tremendous amount of experience as an operator, right? Good way to again get in. But then on the flip side of that, if you have some experience or you have an asset, you can decide on if you want to build out that brand and if you want to build out that store. And what that looks like is a completely different journey than somebody who's investing and researching and looking at the risk involved with this particular investment, deal. And so there's a different way to look at it. You can put all your creative energy and you can put all of your energy essentially into a project and saying, okay, I'm going to keep on doing this until the true entrepreneurial grit, right? And just kind of keep putting yourself in and keep going, regardless of the risk, because there's a tremendous amount of risk there. Whereas an investor is going to have a very different perspective. They're not going to want to go in that level and that depth of it. They're expecting that entrepreneur to do that. That's why they're investing in that entrepreneur, right? So there's a couple of different lenses that you can look at this relationship and look at, which is your access to entry into this particular market. And so I think those things become really important for anyone who decides to take the entrepreneurial route, as I did, right? You really have to think about your brand. You really have to think about your processes in place. What are the things that investors really are looking for? And what's the things that are going to get my bills paid on time? And not just my bills paid on time, but then also get me profitable enough so I can start to get out dividends to my investors and to any of my debts and whatever else that I have going on. So this really needs to become more of a structural play where how do I structure out my financial model to make sure that all of these things are being hit. That's something that is very important. So whether or not you're looking at it from investors' perspective or entrepreneurial perspective, you really have the same work to do. You're still building out these financial models. You're still explaining the risks that are involved. You're still building a team. You're still building all of these, I hate to call them SOPs right off the bat, but essentially these like processes, right? Like how are you planning to manage these processes? And if you can articulate that well, you're going to have an easier time with getting investment money. You can't just go to the bank and borrow money. So, we have to have these relationships and we have to have some trust and we have to start to build not only rapport, but financial capability and aptitude and being able to really share and communicate that. So corporate communication becomes a big part of this, right? If you're good at communicating this to your investors, that's one side of it. Are you good at communicating this to your team and the people who are essentially doing those tasks for you? So there's a lot that goes into this particular piece of it. But I think very much so that, as our industry changes a bit, we'll see some more capital come in, hopefully. But as of now, you can see that, it's been very, very hard to really raise. And I think, I think for women, it can be even harder in some cases. And if you don't have that level of experience that, previously I worked for a larger multi-state operator, I came with a pedigree, right? I mean, like it made sense that I had this amount of knowledge. I've been in the business world for a long time. That might not be the case for a lot of social equity applicants. And if that's not the case, can you get somebody at your helm who does have that level of aptitude in this business? They can only help you get that much further.
Absolutely. Building out the team is, if you don't have the skills, build your team so that you have all of those skills at the table, because investors are going to look for that. As part of that working model and that financial model, it's understanding all of the implications that go along with that. A big one in this space is a tax implication. Plant touching entities fall under very different tax code than non-plant touching. And understanding what 280E is, what it means. So that is the section of IRS code that says that as a plant touching licensed entity, you are only able to deduct the cost of goods sold. So if we think about a standard business, a non-cannabis business, or ancillary businesses in this space, you're able to deduct all of your typical deductions and credits. Rent, payroll, advertising, things of that nature. When you are a license holder or a plant touching, the only thing that you get to deduct is the cost of goods sold. So it is important from an accounting perspective to understand, how do you calculate cost of goods sold? What's allowed to be added into that calculation, and what's not, and then how do you account for that in the books? How do you create margins so that you're profitable? Taking all of those things into consideration. There's a lot of questions right now about, what does rescheduling look like for 280E? It will change it, but depending on how rescheduling occurs, we don't necessarily know to the full degree of how it will change tax implications. That's federal income tax. So then you have state income tax. Illinois is a state that decoupled from federal. So Illinois has said, we want cannabis businesses to enjoy the same deductions and credits that other businesses do. So at the state level, you do get to deduct all of the usual things. You are not limited to just cost of goods sold. You've got sales tax, excise tax, cannabis tax. It isn't just income tax. So tax implications across the board are heavier for license holders. And being able to take that into account in your profit margins and in your financial model, and understanding the impacts of all of that are critical, because you don't want to get to your first filing. And I mean, there are always aha moments, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but you don't want that large aha moment at the point of filing. You want to make sure that you are prepared and recording things appropriately, keeping track of the books, all of those things, so that you are ready for that.
Yeah, absolutely, Heather. I mean, you're the tax expert here by all means, and just from an operator's perspective for me, one good form of advice that I received that I think we've really stuck with is right, like, we are really looking for a consistent practice of this. And as long as our practice is consistent and we have a methodology and we have a way to explain that methodology, we fall into a place where we're okay. And at less of a risk of audits and things of that nature, right? So essentially what that means is, if your cost of goods sold always includes your exit bag, then it always includes your exit bag, because you can't, leave without that exit bag with it. And so, adding things like that in. And so making decisions on, what am I going to decide to use as my cost of goods sold, and is there a justifiable reason for us to be able to do so? so and where so are we putting that, and then staying consistent with that manner year over year, and making sure that that is, you know, that is part of our SOP, right, on how we manage this taxation piece of it. So having some, you know, some foresight to be able to say, I know that, you know, these are going to continue to become, this is going to continue to become a larger and larger portion of my of taxation for us. So where can I really leverage where I need to spend my time? This is a tricky part for all of us in cannabis. I mean, we're at the whim of the taxes, as Heather was mentioning, right? It's not um, just one level of taxation. There's quite a few. And then we also see our customers getting taxed pretty highly on the products. And so, I mean, with that entire environment, if you're not paying attention to, you know, what your taxes are doing, you're leaving money at the table. And also from an operating perspective, right? Like, all right, it's the 20th of every month you've got your taxes due or whatever the heck it is, right? And so how are you planning your cash flow around that? What's going out for operating costs that week? What's happening as far as, you know, anything else that's concerned? So how are you really building this into your annual picture, and you know, or your quarterly, whatever, however you guys, you know, however the individual decides to manage this, but how are you really planning according to that? I think becomes a big part of it.
And I would actually jump in on that. And although income taxes are filed annually, this is not something that you want to look at on an annual basis. When you're starting out, this is something that you want to look at on a daily, a weekly, monthly. Once you get those things in place and you have your processes in place, you know, your duration can stretch a little bit. But at the early points, this is a daily or weekly evaluation. Where are we? Are we in good stead with where we need to be as far as record keeping, again, cash flow management, things of that nature. And then as those things level out, that review can be stretched out a little bit. You're not necessarily looking at it day to day. You're looking at it week to week and then quarter to quarter. But again, consistency, taking inventory regularly, running those calculations regularly, which brings us then into the conversation about cash flow. Cash flow in the cannabis space, it's really a matter of managing all of your moving parts, because this space, actual cash is more prevalent, just by nature of the environment. So those tight controls, those tight audits, knowing, you know, how internally in the dispensary, in the business, how are you managing the physical movement of cash? We talked about that a little bit earlier with the banking. How are you auditing? How are you tracking? Your accountant is probably going to ask you for different counts during the day from different people at different points in the process. That's an audit component. That's something that the bank is also going to ask for. And then the other concept of cash flow, of the liquidity aspect of, do I have enough money to meet my obligations? Can I make payroll this week? Can I pay the bills? Do I have enough set aside to make that sales tax payment on the 20th of the month that Mahja referenced? So lots of moving parts, and in an industry where there is less access to a short-term line of credit. If you're a construction company and you can't make payroll this week because you had a hiccup, a lot of times you go to the bank and you're like, hey, I need a loan, a line of credit to get through the next 10 days until this invoice gets paid, XYZ. That is not a component that is readily available in this market. So cash flow management is crucial. And sometimes I mean, at the end of the day, that's one of the biggest factors that matters, is do you have enough liquidity to pay all the people that need to be paid and then open again tomorrow? Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, that becomes such an important part I mean, so much money moving around, right? I mean, chasing this around is essentially the task of a very, very smart bookkeeper or multiple bookkeepers at some point that really are helping to monitor every, as we mentioned, every single penny, right, that's spent. But as Heather was kind of, alluding to the fact that if you don't have the cash necessary, you can't just borrow from a bank. You're really going to have to figure some things out. So, right, we have things like capital calls in business, right? Like where we can say, all right, the owners and we're missing, $75,000, and that's on the low end, right? But like say you're missing $600,000, whatever it is. What do you plan to do, and how did the ownership ante up, right? And what does it look like for the investors there? And how does that process really work out throughout so if you're not having good cash flow, these are the kind of problems you might end up in. So what can you do to really, really start better relationships with your cultivators, with your other vendors? What do your payment plans really look like? Even with sales tax, right? I mean, like even with any of this, you can put yourself on plans. You can put yourself on plans with IDFPR. There's a lot of ways for social equity applicants and any business owner for that matter, to really be smart and strategic about this. But as Heather was mentioning, and I was mentioning, that it's about monitoring these numbers and analyzing them and breathing them every day, if not every day, at the minimum, at least every week, and really, really having a solid understanding of where cash is coming in, where cash is coming out. You might even want to be as strategic as saying, hey, I do my cash pickups on such and such date because I know it's going to drop at the bank the next day. At that time, I know payroll goes in the following, whatever. And you can really manage and start to plan, right? If you have, I mean, just like your personal finances, right? You want to make sure that you know the cadence of when these bills are coming in. So you can start to build a process around them. You can start to have some kind of an idea that, every 2 weeks, you pay payroll. So you know that maybe that's not the week that you decide to pay a lot of other hefty bills, right? If it's first of the month is when your mortgage or your rent or whatever is due, you want to make sure similarly that you're planning these things accordingly. The good news about it is if you're a retailer or a wholesaler, right, and you're in a lot of shelf space, or you have a lot of customers coming in, we're in a good period. October is usually a really good month for retailers. We see spikes in business. I think the holidays similarly start to see some really higher numbers, and then you kind of see that dip in January and things like that. But I think it's a good time of season for a lot of us in cannabis to kind of see some of this bump. But as you kind of manipulate, and this is why we talk about why location becomes such an important part of where your asset is. If you're not even able to break even, these stores are just going to continue to suck, suck, suck. And where are you finding that capital? And in most cases, you might end up looking for other partners to bring on, selling more pieces of equity, really, really trying to find, how do I fund this particular thing? And maybe in some cases you have lines of credit and you can use them personally. But again, you're using debt to be able to, in some way, to get yourself into a better space here. So from day one, really, really being mean and lean about it. One of the things we did well was we got one store open quickly, and our store, as much as as well, good for us that it did so well, that it was able to really fund the other projects for us. And I think that's a really important part of it, is if you're looking through risk management from an investor's lens, or you're looking at it from an entrepreneurial lens, you really need to have an idea of what that looks like for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, it looks like we might have a couple of questions. Let's see. Can you share how much you spend on bookkeeping and accounting? Who do you use? We spend about 35,000 annually with a company called Jitasa. So I don't know that there's a flat amount that you can necessarily target. It really depends on staffing. So in our firm, when we work with clients, the client might have a full-time bookkeeper. If they have a full-time bookkeeper, it's a relationship of how much work occurs on the client side and how much work occurs at the accounting firm side. Most of those quotes are really going to be specific to your situation. I'm not comfortable just putting out a flat number, because you don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know what size of you don't know what size of business you're working with, you don't know the complexities, you don't know how many locations. So I don't know that there's really a way to throw out a number. You know, just a general ballpark number, but it should always be, my opinion is your accounting should always be a value. It really shouldn't be an expense. It should be something that is helping you better run your business. There is a compliance aspect to it. There are things that you have to do from an accounting perspective that you can't skip. But overarching accounting should be a value to your equation and help you make a better profit, help you address that bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah, just to add to that, Heather, I mean, you're right. It's so hard to put a number on this because it depends on how much bookkeeping is really happening. Do you have 5 stores all open? Do you have, a store open? I mean, these look different. Are you pre-revenue? Like where are you in the picture of things? And that should kind of help to adjust how much you are spending on these things. As a scrappy entrepreneur, I think that what's big and very important is sometimes bringing in people who might not necessarily have the experience in cannabis bookkeeping. And this is a strategy that worked for me, right? Because I had the time to train them the way that I wanted my books to be kept. And so it didn't matter that you didn't know a lot about cannabis, but it mattered that you knew how to bookkeep. And because of that, I might have been able to kind of negotiate a better pricing for these folks and then say, hey, this is how I want it. And then as we kind of continue to grow the books and there's more accounts to kind of manage, then we will increase the price according to that. And then that relationship kind of becomes one of give and take, right? You have these relationships, you start to communicate, you're talking to these folks on a daily basis, they're watching your bookkeeping. And I think what's really important too, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, is that you really have to be smart to say, what can I put into place that is going to reduce my bookkeeping hours? So, for instance, are my managers putting in every single expense, every single receipt, are they putting it in a manageable report or an Excel or something that I can easily, and I'm not just paying somebody to plug in numbers and manage and chase receipts and, oh, it's in this Dropbox and grab it here or whatever it is. And really finding a system that works for you. Is there, an email that this always goes to? Is there an SOP that is expected for anyone who's spending money or moving money around or anything like that? What is particularly happening? And so again, operationally, this becomes a big part to manage. And it'll help you reduce your expenses externally with your bookkeepers, if they're an external entity, or with your CPAs, if you're doing this appropriately. And I think that like exactly like Heather was saying, the better your bookkeeper, the less you're going to pay your CPA. The less it's
Absolutely.
going to make a big difference. Absolutely.
Right. And having those SOPs in place that Mahja has talked about a number of times is, as a CPA, and as an accountant, if you know that those things are in place, you are not having to go back to the first step. Rework is costly in any component. So a lot of work can be done at the bookkeeper level, and our position is always push those tasks to the lowest possible cost and train them to do those tasks according to your procedures. And it is a partnership. If the accountant sees something and they're like, oh, we would rather see XYZ occurring at step 2, talking through that and then adjusting things accordingly so that there's fewer adjustments at the quarterly level or at the annual level. Asia, it looked like there was another question that had popped up in the Q&A, but I don't see it.
Yeah, that one was a comment, but I can throw some questions your way, of course.
Sure, absolutely.
As we were talking about safe banking and access to capital, as a consumer, what can we do to really advocate for that for business owners as the industry is evolving?
A lot of it is conversation and education. I don't remember if it was Dina or Wendy that talked. It was Wendy that talked about the bank president calling her and asking questions. If you in your own personal network, if you have people in the banking industry, have those open conversations with them. Our bank, the third bank that we finally landed at, I've had a number of conversations with them about, you know, what are the scary things and what are the not scary things? What are the things to think about? What things could you ask for from a license holder that helps minimize risk when safe banking isn't in place? Our role in this industry, the first thing that we do, we're educators in whatever your role is in the space, you're educators. So having that open conversation, if you're in that conversation, share your experiences. People want to know. This is a community, more open than probably any other industry that I've worked in, as far as willing to share and network. So that would be mine. Just be open and have those conversations, share your experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. It's hard to say, right? The consumer sometimes is so far removed from the business of what we do, and it's so convoluted and all of these barriers. And so the consumer really doesn't necessarily even understand that, like, they come into the shop and buy something and walk away with this pleasant, amazing experience if they would have already known the, trail of tears and dead bodies behind us as this kind of took place. But what's really, I think, important is to always be involved politically as much as possible. I know the political environments can be very stressful in today's environment, and it's just can be a challenging piece of it. But to understand, what constituents are pro cannabis for you and who aren't, who is going to support the industry to continue to grow. I think those are important conversations, and even the ones who are not, being brave enough to have conversations with them, say, listen, I, respect your opinion, but here's mine. And I want to continue to have these difficult dialogues, because until we really, come to some kind of an agreement around this industry is not going anywhere. It's only growing. And I think that's a common consensus. Nobody can, it's undeniable.
As a, I'm going to kind of pose this question for both of you in different ways, but as a business owner, what pieces of advice would you give to somebody who is either starting out or considering starting out and don't necessarily understand the landscape of the industry? And then for Heather, I know you work with primarily ancillary businesses, so I'd love to hear your version of that for an ancillary business owner.
Yeah, I would say, if you don't know this space, I say this with a lot of care and compassion. Be wary and don't just jump in head first. I really, really recommend watching, learning, integrating yourself into systems that are already doing this, people who are very, very well involved. Get a little bit of time to shadow, right? Like, if you never had an apprentice, then you don't just become the doctor, right? You can't just, if you didn't go through your fellowship, you can't just become a physician that's practicing, right? I mean, these are important aspects of it. You need to have some level of training. It's just going to make your business that much more profitable having that experience. You don't want to trip up on these easy things that could be, detrimental, like the bookkeeping side of it, right? You don't want to trip up on your taxes. You don't want to trip up on how do you manage your cash even internally, and again, you miss a couple of payrolls, or you didn't manage your cadence of how these bills are coming in. Well, you could be in some deep water. So I really, really suggest, really looking for education, finding, like Heather has mentioned a few times, that this is a very open environment in cannabis. There's a lot of us who are here to help at the table. We understand how hard it can be and the barriers to entry. I mean, you're not going to win another license, right? So how do you get in? We understand, when we want to be able to help navigate that space for you. So I think those are some of the, important things to kind of consider. Know what you don't know. Put people around you who do know better than you in those particular situations. Watch every penny. I cannot tell you enough. And even from my young entrepreneurial journey, like, you get your first cash infusion and you think, oh great, I'm going to spend all my money on doing this, this, and this, and this. Absolutely not. Don't do that, right? Like, absolutely not. You don't spend anything until it is the absolute right time to spend that. And I think those things become really, really important. Entrepreneurs, we have this very, like, the reason we're successful is we have these visions and passion, and we just grit our way through stuff, and push, push, push. But that can sometimes be at the expense of capital. And, and you don't want to fall into that. You want to really have an even keel to say, these things are important. I know they matter. I want to build something that is important and is can stand the test of time. However, I also need to be able to pay my bills at the end of this month. And so you pick and choose, and you have to be really have the level of discernment to say, when is the right time to spend money in my organization? I can't tell you how many new companies, like, and I get it, like everyone wants to get a logo and get some marketing and stuff like that right off the bat. But honest to goodness, you need that right away. What do you really need to spend? Your designs can always be updated, things can always change as you become, more capital intensive. And I think from an investment point of view, when I'm looking to invest in organizations now, I'm always looking from the perspective of, what have they wasted money on? Because you know what? I know I've been down this road before. Like, where did they waste money? Did they spend a whole bunch of money early on in marketing that they didn't need? Why? What did you do with this? Or did you spend a bunch of money early on creating accounting books? That made a lot of sense, and understanding your chart of accounts. And okay, I can maybe understand that a little bit more, right? Why did we spend that kind of money on it? So really having that level of discernment, I think, would be important for anybody getting into this space. Be wary as just jump in head first. This is a very tough, deep end of the waters, right? So in order to navigate that, you're going to want to have some people who can support you. But I always say, if you're trying to get in, it's better to be the number two person instead of the number one person. You can learn a lot, get a job, really understand the industry. I mean, that was my path, right? I worked directly under the CEO for 5 years at a multi-state operator, doing this very hard work in multiple states. So when I did this for myself, much easier, right? Not much easy. I mean, it was very difficult nonetheless, still, but at least I had some level of experience to back myself up.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I would tack onto that from an entrepreneurial perspective is, know your entrepreneurial personality. If you are not a person that is willing and able to say no, you need to have somebody right next to you that's the person to say no. I joke that a lot of the time, 50% of my job is to say no, or no, but why do you need to do that? What makes you think now is the time to do that? So again, it's a strong team. Most people that get into this space, a lot of people that get into this space have been either entrepreneurs before in different environments, or have been in the industry in a different capacity. So lean into that, but know where there are opportunities in your own field, in your own organization. As far as ancillaries, we have a lot of people that are like, how do you get into the space if you don't have a license and you don't want to have a license? And it's really figuring out what is your superpower? What do you do? And how does that play in the cannabis space? Marketing, if you're a marketing person, figuring out how to fill a gap. It's really about providing your service, sometimes in a uniquely positioned way, and learn, that you have a skill to bring to the table. You're not quite sure how that skill fits. Jump in, maybe go get a job at a dispensary. Maybe if you're trying to figure out how does that work, where can I fit, go get a job. It's maybe not exactly the space that is your target, but learning and being in the environment, being in the space, having those conversations, go to networking events, join organizations, participate in the space. And there will be a day where you're like, from an ancillary perspective, you're like, there's the spot. That's where I need to fit. And then it's just up from there.
Absolutely. It looks like there was one more question. Asia, if we've got some time for that. Looks like, is it possible to partner with a dispensary on a product idea? So I mean, you're talking to somebody who thinks anything is possible. So hence my entrepreneurial personality, right? I think that you want to when you're looking at CPG, which is consumer packaged goods, you want to work with a wholesaler because you're going to need a facility to manufacture that for you. So that's where your partnership needs to lie. Now, on the flip side of that, you need to have an agreement with a dispensary or multiple dispensaries to say, I have already secured shelf space, and that maybe they put in a purchase order or a pre-order based off of what relationship or what the cost is going to look like and what the terms are going to look like for that. So first things first, I think is, your concept of your product, finding a partner who's going to be your manufacturing partner. Obviously, in between there, you're figuring out your model and making sure this makes money for you. What is my partnership going to cost for this? What is packaging and labor cost for this? What is my marketing and all my expenses? And then where am I going to find shelf space? And is that something that is sustainable for me to be able to do so? There's quite a few retailers. Shelf space is very hard to get nowadays. It's just, there's a lot of cultivators and a lot of new products that are going to continue to happen. This is just going to become more and more of a compressed type of a situation for shelf space. So really that becomes a difficult a piece of it. But I think most people are really good about offering shelf space to newer vendors, to call, especially craft licenses. I mean, we have a lot of craft licenses in our craft growers in our shelves today, and we continue to, if everybody gets a shot, right? If your products move, great, we keep you. If your products don't move, you're out. That's just kind of how it is. You've got 2 weeks or a month to prove yourself, and if that's just not what it looks like, we're going to move on to somebody who's giving us a better margin. So, I would say your relationship there needs to be focused, yes, on dispensaries, but also on your wholesale partner and who you're going to be, using for your manufacturing arm, and making sure that they have a lot of shelf space. And if they have a lot of shelf space, you can ride their coattails and be like, great, part of the agreement here is every store you have it, can I join your menu? Can I be on that can I be in that process as you guys pitch your other brands? Can I do a special as a launch and, offer a special deal, maybe something like that. So again, understanding how to work that deal structure out and who you need to work that deal structure out will be important.
All right. Well, no, there's no more questions, but if you both would like to take a second closing remarks, we'll wrap up at exactly 10.
Sure. We just appreciate the opportunity to chat today. Like I said, our primary role is always to be an educator. If you have questions or are looking for more information, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to have those conversations. Again, it's a very open community, open network, always willing to share, and appreciate the time to come and chat today.
Yeah, absolutely. Always enjoy doing anything for IWC, right? It is a really, really near and dear to me to see women grow in not just cannabis, but in any space. And I think that any support that High Haven or I can ever give, we're always here to do that. And I think on the flip side, for folks who are watching and listening to this, communicate, network, talk to people, ask these questions, send an email, send a text, or, message on LinkedIn. Find ways to really continue to go through your journey. And as things have to pivot, you pivot and you continue to kind of move things in the direction. Come stop by at our stores. I have to pitch, of course, come check out the retail stores. They're wonderful. They're like one of the most unique dispensaries in the state of Illinois, if not the most. Each of them have a special, type of personality, and you come into speakeasy stores, and from everything from great product to exceptional customer service. I think most of our stores are at 5 stars, or all our stores are at 5 star. I think we have it in 4.9. So really proud of the work we've done, and I urge you to live into our brand. Come and check it out.
I love a shameless plug. I've been to High Haven. I came to your opening in where was that?
Elgin. Mhm.
Elgin, and it was wonderful, wonderful. So I will definitely recommend as well. Please stop through. Thank you both for joining us. I'm going to quickly transition to the next session. We have a number of speakers, so I want to get that one started at 10, so make sure we have enough time. So thank you both again.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.